Choose to pray for what you want. If you believe yours is the only way, then you're the fool who lives to
Leading up to the conclusion of Edge versus AJ Styles from Night 2 of WrestleMania 38, a new faction would seem to be formed underneath the guidance of the Rated R Superstar, with the first member being the former NXT North American Champion, former Punishment Martinez from Ring of Honor, and Damian Priest. Now, this is a big opportunity for Damian Priest, and something that I think a lot of people have been waiting for Priest to get that opportunity on the main roster, because he seemed to be a big deal in NXT, but he never got that big win. He never got that big championship or that big victory that made him, break out. And I think that we were just waiting for the right time on the main roster, and underneath the guidance of Edge, it seems to be pushing his career in the right direction. Now, I think you can really date back the beginning of this faction, or the beginning of this new heel persona for Edge, back to the feud with Seth Rollins leading into SummerSlam of 2021. I think that him coming out with the Brood entrance and the Brood gear and the jacket and the drink from the cup, and the beginning of his theme song being the Brood as he rose up from the stage with the flames surrounding him, it was the symbolic meaning of Edge going to that darker place, going to the place that he seemed to lose in his return to the WWE, and that dark heel bastardly Edge, who did so many dastardly deeds as the Rated R Superstar. But going back to that Brood mentality is really what seemed to start at SummerSlam and then continue in Day 1 2022, where he faced off against The Miz and also entered with that Brood style entrance. Now, continuing on the Brood, they ended up debuting in October of 1998 underneath the guidance of the first ever vampire character in the WWF at the time in Gangrel. It would be Edge and Christian both making their WWF debuts with this group, and this would eventually carry on into the new Brood, which was Michael Hayes alongside with the newly debuting at the time in 99, Matt and Jeff Hardy, who would come to be known as the Hardy Boys. And vampires were very big at the time in the late 80s into the 90s, and I think a lot of that was due to the vampire cult classic known as The Lost Boys, and I believe that had a lot of fuel to the fire and a lot of inspiration for the group with Gangrel, Edge, and Christian, which obviously how successful they would come to be later on in their careers. But one thing the Brood always used to say in their catchphrase was, the freaks come out at night. Now, when you go and look back at some of the past segments in the beginning of the year, in the end of 2021, there were multiple segments where Edge and Damian Priest would kind of embrace each other. Even Edge saying that he loves what Damian Priest is doing, he loves what he's doing with his character, and he loves that he's, embracing that more quote-unquote edgy side, which was one of the quotes that Damian Priest used in a segment with Edge and Beth Phoenix backstage. But we didn't believe what it would come to be known as now with this new faction being built. But it's important to look at all the little tidbits and all of the little steps in the road which got us to where we are now. Edge would fully embrace this new heel style character and new heel persona in the lead up to the match with AJ Styles at WrestleMania 38, when he really didn't know who his opponent was going to be until closer to the pay-per-view, and then once it was determined to be the phenomenal AJ Styles, he would signify the full heel turn with a concerto to the skull of AJ. And then obviously, I think a lot of the promo work, especially right before WrestleMania 38, one of the final promos that Edge did was a Judgment Day style promo with the scale, or I can't think of what the name of the instrument is, but it was on the poster of Judgment Day 2009, and I believe he said Judgment Day was upon them in the promo, which was kind of a cool knockback and a cool, nod to one of the old school pay-per-views from the Ruthless Aggression era. Now, Edge and Styles would obviously go on to have a great match at WrestleMania 38, which you really wouldn't expect anything different from two of the best professional wrestlers in the world and two of the best professional wrestlers in the WWE in a quote-unquote dream match. I think the only criticism for this match, and I think it's been a criticism for a lot of Edge's newer work since his return to the WWE, was the fact that his matches go on a little bit too long. And although he always had that kind of psychological, ultimate opportunist style, I feel like they seem to drag on a little bit longer, and it's more of a technical style of Edge than an opportunist heel work, but I believe that he'll get back to it, in this heel run as the leader of this new faction. The end of the match and the introduction of the first member of this new faction would come as Edge was lying prone on the canvas and AJ Styles would go to the apron to hit his signature phenomenal forearm. As the camera would cut away, AJ would be looking off to his side and see Damian Priest standing there watching over AJ Styles. He would then jump off the rope to go for the phenomenal forearm, springboard into the signature move of Edge, into the springboard's catching spear, which would lead to the 1-2-3 and the victory for the Rated R Superstar. I think a lot of people believed that it was important for AJ Styles to win this match, but it was also important for Edge to get the victory, but I kind of feel like it was a little bit surprising that Edge would go to get this victory at WrestleMania. But with the introduction of this faction, the new heel style of Edge, the great entrance that he had, I think they pulled it off perfectly. And this really is the kind of saving grace for Damian Priest's WWE career, in my opinion. I think he never really got the opportunity to be that full-on heel that we knew he could thrive as, and we only knew that because of his work as Punishment Martinez back in Ring of Honor, back on the Indies, that he was good as a babyface, he was good, he was popular, he was very over with the crowd, but giving him the opportunity to be that villain is exactly what the character needs, and under the guidance of Edge and in this faction, it's perfect, and I cannot wait to see who else they add as a new member, and that's what we're going to be talking about next. We saw on the Raw after WrestleMania that Edge and Damian Priest would have this segment, and it made Priest honestly look like $1 million, and him being the first member, it's just one extra step in the elevation of his career. But aside from him, I believe that the next best option, and honestly, this was actually reported from, I believe it was Fightful Select. They had reported who they believe is going to be the next two members for the group, and the first member was going to be the Blackheart in the former NXT Tag Team Champion and NXT World Champion in Tommaso Ciampa. Ciampa would lose his farewell match at NXT Stand and Deliver to Tony D'Angelo right before WrestleMania weekend. I actually believe it was on the Saturday, which was right before night one of WrestleMania, but he lost the match and then had a brief farewell moment with Triple H in the middle of the ring, which was a very emotional moment, especially based on what had recently happened to Triple H. But I just feel like Ciampa going to the main roster, being a part of Edge's faction, it gives him that instant gratification and that instant push, being aligned with a former world champion and a WWE Hall of Famer. And aside from that, it also can bring him back to that heel character that he portrayed so well as the NXT champion. And he had one of the most memorable, I believe the most memorable reign of an NXT champion in NXT history. And I think that anything we can do to get back to that type of Tommaso Ciampa is exactly what we need. And being a member of this faction is the perfect potion for Ciampa's main roster debut, which we've been waiting for a long time as well. And the final member, at least being reported so far, to join this new faction alongside the leader in Edge and Damian Priest is Rhea Ripley. This is my brutality. And honestly, when it comes to Rhea Ripley, who is a former NXT Women's Champion and a former Raw Women's Champion and a former a former Women's Tag Team Champion, I think her main roster run has really disappointed a lot of fans, and I think that we expected so much from her just because of how well she was portrayed in NXT, how dominant she was in NXT. We expected so much more from her, and I think that her main roster run has been nothing short of a disappointment, at least in the eyes of the fans. And that's something we've kind of come to expect when it comes to main roster call-ups of major NXT talent. Triple H seems to know exactly what to do and exactly how to portray them in the correct way. But once they get up to the main roster and have to deal with the WWE creative, everything kind of seems to, quote-unquote, shit the bed. And I think that Rhea Ripley on the main roster, I think the first mistake with Rhea Ripley is portraying her as a face. And I think Giving her the opportunity to be a heel in this faction is just exactly what she needs to elevate herself. And, you know, something I had mentioned in my Building the Perfect House of Black video for AEW, and something I mentioned about the Ministry of Darkness, was that they could really benefit from a female counterpart in the group. And I think adding Ripley to this faction would really go to drive that point home. You know, it fits the look of Rhea Ripley with this new Edge faction. I feel like it fits the metal, it fits the rock and roll, it fits that heel, you know, just evil faction that this is being built around, and it adds the female counterpart, so that's killing, you know, two birds with one stone. It allows Rhea Ripley to be a full-fledged heel, which I know she was portrayed as a heel a little bit in the beginning of her NXT career, but she's never really been that full-on just villain. And a lot of the reasons why I like all of these members that are being reported is because it's going to give them the opportunity to be the villains that we know they can be, to be the heels that we know that their characters are supposed to be portrayed as, because it can bring out deeper roots and different avenues and different areas of the character that can't be portrayed as a face. And this Edge faction, you know, whatever the name is, it doesn't really have a name yet. I think the Unholy Alliance is a good name. But aside from that, I just feel like Rhea Ripley is a great addition to the faction, and I cannot wait to see where this goes in the future.